Returning to our Pleiadean home, Part 3. During an Apharian song meditation, I have vividly recalled the words from one of the songs named to the new reality calling. While remaining in love, we gain happiness. In this world, all our dreams are embodied. All animals and people will be transformed by the light, turning our world into a bulwark of beauty. Question. In previous answers about stellar Pleiadian home, you have already mentioned the relationship between the Pleiadians and animals. As far as I understand, here we are talking about the quantum leap of consciousness of our planetary entity, Earth, following which the inferior awareness levels of the first pair of our EECD centers, the two lower psychoenergetic centers responsible for our form, survival and reproduction, chakras, will be deactivated. Hence, the question arises: if self-consciousness of all animals is currently dependent on lower frequency levels at the rate of approximately 90%, and after the quantum transition they will be deactivated, then how they can be transformed by the light in higher quality worlds, since for that they should have an intelligence and the animal individuality? Currently, we have types of animals which are beneficial for our evolution. In our current groups of human continuums, only those forms of the animal world are massively represented, whose psychogenic states are sufficiently synchronized with the ranges of manifestation of psychisms that are generated by the collective human consciousness. Since the activities of most people are subordinated to aggressive and grossly sexual realization needs and interests, from the first to the fourth lower frequency levels of consciousness of the two lower psycho-energy centers, chakras, in the animal world around us, predatory types predominate in one way or another. In the appropriate proportions in relation to the non-aggressive and the most developed people, the forms of self-consciousness of herbivores are represented, as well as dolphins and whales, which, like us, belong to the mammalian class and possess a highly developed intelligence far exceeding the anthropoid apes. Their percentage in the animal world is as low as the percentage of highly developed representatives of mankind. The process of evolution of each form, molecules, atoms, humans, animals, plants, minerals, stars, galaxies, etc., is subject to the development laws of its type of collective consciousness. Many of the known animal species belong to the same type of consciousness. However, the development principle of all collective cosmic intellects, humans, animals, plants, atoms, etc., allows, upon the achievement of the highest degrees of synchronization among themselves, to create common forms of self-consciousness, complementing each other for some abilities and realizing opportunities. Thus, not only increasing survival and competitiveness, but also gaining previously absent experience. At the same time, each type of various collective cosmic intellects simultaneously continues to develop in its own direction, deriving the necessary experience from the jointly manifested forms. A good example of that is the development of human forms, since certain types of animal collective consciousness can be partially implemented through our brain. For instance, this possibility is realized through the structures of the limbic system of the brain. Paleo and archicortex plus amygdala, hypothalamus and septal nuclei, which together with the cellular structures of all systems and organs provides physiological and low-vibration psychisms in our body. They broadcast the experience they receive from their type of collective cosmic intelligence. Human interests are realized and modified through special gene programs embedded in the DNA of the neocortex neurons, the cerebral cortex, except for the orbital part of the frontal lobes and some segments of the temporal lobes serving the interests of non-human types of consciousness. Thus, our human existence is also ensured by the presence in our subtle bodies, Хрустальный body, the supreme analog of the physical body, and the Лутальный body, its lower frequency analog, of the innumerable variety of ethereal relationships. Based on this realizational symbiosis, a multi-thousand-year practice of deep psychic interaction of man with his totem animal became possible. The belief that animals do not have personal self-awareness is a totally wrong and dangerous misconception. Animal individual self-awareness and other similar information. Any animal or an insect in its own way suffers from mental or physical pain, stress, trauma, or an illness. Many of them can be strongly mentally attached to other animals, even of different kind, for instance, a monkey and a large turtle. See YouTube for more of such videos, showing mercy and nobility, friendship and loyalty, jealousy and envy, love and sacrifice, altruism and intellect. The very presence of the mechanism of rationality indicates the ability of the animal to establish identity, to conduct self and other types of analysis of other behavioral reactions. In particular, a fine system of feeling and self-identification, personalization, is possessed by mammals, including dolphins and whales. The concept of animalistic instinct is not an analog of the term collective unconscious, which I use to describe the energy information part of the biochemical reaction processes, cellular analogs of our psychomental activity in our body. Moreover, we do not subjectively realize and interpret these processes in any way because of the tremendous difference between our and their thought imageries, cell consciousness. The biocreators of our cells are remotely interconnected via photoreductive ether with their own type of collective cosmic intellect, thus acquiring the necessary information. Instinct is only an opportunity, means, and mechanism for maintaining a certain relationship with the purpose of analyzing surrounding circumstances and choosing one's own behavior. We have the exact same pattern of interconnection with our collective human cosmic intellect, yet nobody doubts that each of us has an individual self-consciousness. Since it's difficult for you to overcome the stereotype common to most people, imposed on all of us by an abstruse, but in fact deeply ignorant scientific brotherhood, I want to highlight once again that in the entire multiverse, there is no form that does not have its own subjective self-perception. Any photon or fermion, cell or crystal has its inherent perception system capabilities regarding its own nature, its properties, interests, as well as the purpose of each of its actions and choices. For forms exhibited on higher frequency vibrational levels, I applied the more advanced term of individual self-consciousness, overconsciousness, superconsciousness, supraconsciousness, proto-consciousness, hyperconsciousness, and praconsciousness, discussed in detail in ECDology. Anticipating your question, I will note that the term collective subconsciousness is applied to biological and bioplasma human forms due to the heavy dependence of their focus dynamics from the influence of other non-human civilization types of collective consciousness. After each of us has achieved a certain creative cosmic state, the structure and capabilities of our consciousness will radically change, as well as our perception of ourselves as individual persons and personalities will change substantially in its fundamental essence. In the next range of our manifestation, the collective influence on our dynamics of non-human perceptions is drastically reduced due to the powerful awareness of each person of their unity with their collective cosmic mind. We will fully realize us to be an indispensable structural part of this collective cosmic mind. Therefore, any collective consciousness is an integral of the simultaneous manifestation of a set of identical forms of self-consciousness of its constituent members, united by a certain set of common characteristic traits. At the same time, the diversity of energy information interrelations between representatives of various types of consciousness is due to the presence of a powerful and universal system of ethereal analogs, which interpenetrate into each other at different levels of their manifestation. Animal self-consciousness forms in higher quality scenarios. Let me remind you that when we talk about the dimensionality of the space-time continuums, in our arguments we are influenced only by those of its variations, which are based on the predominance of our human perceptions, the roots of the majority of which immense into primitive communal forms of existence with prevailing survival tasks. In the current groups of human space-time continuums, due to the aggressiveness and senseless bloodthirstiness, cruelty and ignorance, which are still very peculiar to the most people, we ourselves continue to structure the surrounding reality with deeply subjective notions that animals, one way or another, can be dangerous for our existence, thereby attracting in our life situations, and therefore in the world parameters of our existence, the variance of non-human forms with the expected characteristics. In the more highly vibrational worlds of our habitat, we ourselves become much wiser, more self-conscious, more kind, open and generous than now. Knowing and deeply comprehending the nature of things, we form our world with only positive ideas, attracting into our surrounding reality the equally positive forms of self-consciousness, and not aggressive and bloodthirsty ones, which should be feared or annihilated. Each variant of our ideas pertaining to various types of animals correspond to their interpretations existing in the structures of its collective cosmic mind, mostly corresponding to our expectations. The rapid realization of our ideas and the fulfillment of all of our desires and aspirations is also achieved through a much less inert, incomparably more universal and flexible than now organization of space-time. This is also due to the absence of an infinite number of extremely destructive links with the surrounding nature based on our current profound delusions about its essence, our ignorance and misunderstanding of the laws of the formation of cause-effect relationships, and the falsity of the fundamental conclusions made on the basis of practical research and perceptions underlying modern science fundamentals. Therefore, in the more highly vibrational realities where we implement, through bioplasma forms, our more qualitative interpretations, we are surrounded only by specific kinds of beautiful animals that don't contradict our positive perceptions of nature. So, how do they survive the quantum transition? They do not. However, they naturally revitalize the post-mortem transition of self-consciousness into a new scenario of development takes place, into similar forms of those groups of spatio-temporal continuums which were affected by the given act of quantum transition. Alternatively, by powerfully increasing the quality of their consciousness, they teleport into the forms of realities in their own interpretations, where they, just like us, have a much higher levels of consciousness and the corresponding psychic realizational possibilities and interests. In their own inhuman highly vibrational worlds, there remains nothing left from their current animalistic forms of self-consciousness that would hinder their intellectual and mental development in their own direction. The animals in these highly vibrational realities are not manifested from our worlds, but rather from those where we were able to intuitively choose more qualitative directions of our own development. That is, there was a group of scenarios where we were given the opportunities for more harmonious and swift self-improvement. Let me highlight that in those worlds the conditions for the implementation of our initial development on this planet were much more favorable than in other spectrum of simultaneous multipolarization of our consciousness, the multiplicity of variants of transition to different scenarios. That means that we today, our current interpretations in the given scenarios, are the result of a millennia-old and laborious process of spontaneous refocusings through the succession of unfavorable worlds. Genetic prerequisites for the formation of the current human forms. If someone finds this arrangement of our common development priority unfair, it will be a mistaken opinion. The very idea of creating in our existential conditions of such a form which could synthesize the maximum amount of diverse quality experience belongs to the Pleiadean scientists of 3.75 fourth levels of dimensionality. Higher vibrational human type entities from the 4th-5th dimensional range had very limited research opportunities of our 3rd-4th dimensional spacetime. However, the primary reason was yet another attempt to finally solve the problem of absolute harmonization of the transition of the higher levels of the collective cosmic human mind to even higher vibrational levels, so that this process would pass without loss or distortion of some evolutionary developments in the form of experience. This was peculiar only to a certain range of general human scenarios, but served as a retarding factor that needed to be overcome at every stage of development in our consciousness type. Ideology postulates that the truly human stage of development begins from the moment of the emergence of the opportunity for a diverse quality synthesis of the two dominants, all love plus all will, with the third one, all unity. This process begins after the crossing into the 4th dimensionality, when we commence to focus on plasma forms, which cannot even remotely be compared with our current bodies, whose possibilities billions-fold exceed the possibilities of our current forms, and the perception systems of which work in the planetary system mode. However, it turned out that not plasma matter from the 6th to the 4th dimensionality is the basis for the beginning of the division of all materiality into different types of consciousness, but each type of collective cosmic intellect also extrapolates some of its inherent functions into levels of formal matter from the 4th to the 0-dimensional levels, forming in this range of the multiverse the set of peculiar to it microtypes of consciousness. For example, the collective consciousness of our civilization. We, as human forms, are the result of far from the first attempt to solve this problem, the complexity of which included finding within the already formed system of scenario transitions within the multiverse and locating the links that would naturally drive the low-frequency, self-consciousness form dynamics to the high-frequency realizational levels. We are far from the first version of the so-called humankind, which was born on the physical globe of Gracele's sound space code of the Earth. More than 35 million conditional years ago, a similar genetic experiment was carried out on our planet, as a result of which several species of humanoid apes have emerged, Pleiopithecus, from which, in the most favorable scenarios, several humanoid civilizations later developed, who then managed to pass an insurmountable earlier light barrier and become part of the plasma forms of self-consciousness. Some of them, in unfavorable time-space continuums, degenerated into Pleiopithecus, Gibbons, and Dryopithecus. The geneticists of many civilizations, for some purposes, exhibited an interest in the latter, and, as a result of that genetic experiment during the Miocene, 15-25 million conventional years ago, the spectrum of the anthropomorphic forms on the Earth expanded dramatically, when transition of some formations of Dryopithecus into humanoid forms have begun to settle in various regions of the planet. In parallel, there was a division of human-like species onto the more advanced ones, due to the gene modification, and the less developed. The latter became known as Sivapithecus, who have segregated and gave rise to orangutans about 18-20 million conditional years ago. Attempts to work with their DNA back then practically led to nothing, but in terms of increasing the coefficient of intelligence in several human civilizations of that period, orangutan has played a very important role. Only after approximately 10-12 million years later, a new stage of experiments contributed to the appearance of gorillas and chimpanzees on Earth. Their prospectivity was noticed by Reptilian, Draconian, and the Aldebaran scientists, who, on this and other planets, needed the brute force. However, at first, their chimpanzees turned out to be quite inert, very timid, and extremely melancholy creatures, who who could not stand up for themselves, and their populations quickly died in the struggle for food resources. This was due to the presence in their ventromedial part of the prefrontal cerebral cortex of special infralimbic system inherited by us, as well as the high ability of the chimpanzee genome to inhibit the powerful amygdala activity, which is responsible for aggressive psychic reactions. They became quite suitable workers, good-natured when necessary, and moderately aggressive in danger situations, only following complex combinations with aggression genes of a gorilla, in whom they proved to be more explosive. After yet another 10 million years, inspired by the Pleiadeans' initiative, it was decided to continue the experiment, but with a fundamentally different approach. Because at the beginning of the development of the collective human cosmic intelligence type up to the 6th dimension, there are certain combinations of pure cosmic qualities, which are informational structure of consciousness. It was decided to select genetic samples corresponding to these information combinations from representatives of different civilizations. As a result, 8 pairs of representatives of male and female genders of mostly compatible civilizations and belonging to different types of consciousness and dimensions have participated in the last version of the process of our creation. As shown by previous experiments, not all DNA sections of the original terrestrial form of self-consciousness, ancestor of the modern orangutan, turned out to be functionally compatible with nucleotide sequences embedded in their genome. To this end, from the DNA of the zygotes, fertilized diploid cells, of each pair of representatives of every member civilizations, genes responsible for their most characteristic qualities were selected. At last, when the offspring from crossing of the orangutan genome with the genome of the ancestors of modern chimpanzees has developed, the incompatibility factor was removed, and there emerged a form of self-consciousness, whose nuclear genome has assumed the DNA sequences of the fertilized ovules of all 8 pairs of participating parent civilizations. Nobody could imagine how the new forms of self-consciousness would behave in various instances of their multipolarized development, simultaneously multiple variants of transition into different scenarios. Under favorable conditions, the implementation of the last version of this experiment stretched out into the conditions of a multitude of diverse quality space-time continuums. This caused the presence of very different, by definition, epigenetic factors, each of which more closely corresponded to the expression of genes in the nucleotide sequence of any particular civilization. Thus, only one of the 8 possible development directions has favored the transformation of the newly created forms into the human type of consciousness. Genome parts of other civilizations were suppressed or completely deactivated. Nevertheless, each of the participating civilizations had the opportunity to study through the more characteristic human beings those aspects of the psychic realization that reflected their interests. Result: collective human consciousness, formed in various periods, represents 3 primary categories. Forms of human self-consciousness who, thanks to the evolutionary preferences they have received, have already joined developed civilizations at different times and different fashions. Second, people who has equally expressed the genome sections of 2 or 3 civilizations and who, by virtue of this, undergo the path to overcome the resulting disharmony, qualitative imbalance, being in a state of temporal loop in relation to any of the civilization's participants. Third, people whose genome is equally active in relation to the qualities of each of the 8 participating civilizations. Because the way in which the basic Pleiadian world outlook, ideology, and the idea of creation of multiple IFR cities of light on Earth is intricately interwoven into the paradigm of the collective consciousness of the given humankind, we can equally refer ourselves to either of the last 2 categories. The only way for us to get out of these time loops is a stable and profound work directed at cultivation in our minds of the ideas of Pleiadean lifestyle and the surrounding reality interrelation image. The most effective form of such self-improvement is the in-depth study of ideology, combined with the daily singing or listening, at least half an hour, of the IFAR songs, song meditations, and the practice of the IFAR type relations.